even being 2-3% dehydrated can affect your performance by up to 20 or even above that 20%. So in a sport like swimming, that can make a massive difference in even a short race.
Especially for young swimmers who think that because they are in water they don't need water.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important point, because you're in the pool, your mouth is probably kept a bit more moist than in any other sport. Your body you don't feel you're sweating, so you don't realise how much fluid you're actually losing in a session. And that's where I think a lot of swimmers don't bother, but if every session you're training at only 75-80%, and when you come to race you're not at your 100%, then that's a big difference that you can get by just drinking more water. So that's a big one that I always try and emphasise. So consequences of dehydration: reduced work capacity. So no matter what event you're doing, or whether it's a training day or a racing day, you can't work as hard. Everything feels harder. Your body temperature doesn't regulate as well, so fatigue will set in earlier. As I said before, with food and fueling, you can't concentrate enough, so technique slips, turns aren't as good, your starts aren't as fast, and not listening to coaches and able to sort of process what coaches might be saying as well. Also things like headaches, cramps, low mood, low energy, and this is often something that sort of mid-afternoon or maybe before a swimming session, a lot of people will be like, I just had a busy day, I'm tired, I need to, I'm just a bit worn out, but it could just be they haven't drunk enough. So you can see why something as simple as drinking more water can make a really big difference, and keeping on top of this will help performance not only in the pool but at school, work, uni, just how you feel day to day. So a few little tips, and this isn't very clear, but it's a test of kind of your hydration status. So when I say to some young people, they kind of go, oh yeah, I'm not doing that, but it's a pretty easy one. The easiest way to check hydration is urine colour. So if it's getting towards this end of the scale, then you're getting really dehydrated. So try and encourage your athletes to make sure that it's towards the lighter end. And as I've got down the bottom there, if it's dark in colour, then drink a full drink bottle and carry on. But always carry a drink bottle. Encourage your athlete to perhaps have a good glass of water with every meal as well, because then it's just, everyone's a bit different. Some people who really struggle with it, I get them to set alarms for every couple of hours to drink a glass of water. Or other people, if they prefer to drink out of a drink bottle, just making sure there's certain times of the day. I had an athlete a couple of weeks ago that we set out a schedule, so their first drink bottle had to be drunk by I think it was 9 in the morning, and then 11, and just set it out like that for the day. So it sort of depends on whether, and again, little things like this sound funny, but they can make a difference, whether your athlete prefers to drink out of a bottle or a glass or a bit of both, and just set a strategy each day around that. Obviously more on hot days, or when they're perhaps at the pool for long periods in quite a warm environment. And as I said, usually water is adequate, but for those longer sessions or during a swim meet, a sports drink can be helpful as well. So a few little tips around meal times. Breakfast, some people kind of skip it, but we need breakfast. It kickstarts your brain and your body after that overnight fast. It provides obviously energy for training, but for the day ahead, it helps recovery from the day before. And I know a lot of athletes find it hard, especially when it's 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, find it hard to eat something before that morning training session, but it is really important to try and get your athletes doing that, even if, and sometimes it takes a bit of training to get them used to it, and there's totally no evidence behind this, but things like, and it can be a bit of trial and error. I know a couple of us used to find that, because it was something that I really struggled with eating in the morning, and we found that eating a banana on its own would come back up and make you feel not very pleasant. But wrapping it in bread, not, as I said, no science behind it, but somehow that kept it down better and more tolerated. So play around with little, trial and error a little bit. Some people find it easier to have liquids or like a yogurt rather than something more solid. So it is trial and error. Everyone can be different, but try and sort of practice these things. And even if you start with, for example, half a banana or one of the little ones, rather than trying to get a big one down, these little things over time, if you can get used to having that, or the athletes used to having that, it will make a big difference to, especially if they're in the pool for a 2-hour session in the morning and they haven't eaten since 7 o'clock the night before or something. That's a long time without food, and by the end of that morning session they're not going to be able to be swimming at their best. And we want to make sure that swimmers are, or any athlete is getting through every session at their best and not kind of getting halfway through and then they're knackered and the rest of the session is sort of not a waste, but they're not getting the benefits of every session.
Ours like a smoothie with banana
Yep.
and some other fruit and maybe peanut butter or
Definitely.
something.
Yep, so smoothies can be a really good one because
It's not
they're
anymore.
easy. You can have it, you can make it, you can even make it the night before.
Yeah.
And drink it on the way to the pool, and that's what I'll talk about a bit more soon, but that planning and preparation, doing what's practical is so important for swimmers who are low on time. They're juggling so much in their life, and we've got to think about what's obviously going to fuel them well, but what's practical as well and what they like too. So there's no point me saying to someone, you've got to eat this, and they're like, no, I don't like it. So that's where as I said before, it's that individual approach that we need to work on for each person, because we all have different likes and dislikes and things that you tolerate and not. So that's something that obviously has to be worked on. And then after your training session, breakfast, and that can be all sorts of different things, but making sure you've got some protein and carbohydrates in there and the fluids as well. A lot of people say, I don't have time, I'm running to school or university, but but it's not an excuse. And being prepared is something that, again, is a big, and I'll talk about it now, but I was going to mention it a bit later. A lot of your athletes will be at that age where they need to start taking ownership and helping you guys. Like, you guys as parents are amazing, you juggle so many things, but try and get your athlete to help start working with you to not necessarily be cooking, because they're probably not going to be home, but sit down with you at the weekend and discuss the week ahead, talk about when they might be later home one night, or make sure they've got the right snacks to be taking with them so they don't have to be relying on going to a service station that probably doesn't have very good options. So that planning and preparation and working with you guys to help make it a team effort, I guess, because it's not easy being a parent and a swimmer. But if you can work together, and I know athletes, well, especially swimmers, will say, I don't have time, but it is important to make that time each week if you can, to work together and map out what needs to be done for that week, or what needs to be purchased at the shops that week to have for the following week. So lunch and dinner meals don't have to be anything fancy. Keeping it simple, especially when time is everyone's limited on time. Include carbohydrates, protein, salad or vegetables. Get that variety of foods in as well. As I was saying before, it's got to be practical. So there's no point saying you need to cook this flash meal that's going to take 2 hours, because a swimmer and a parent of a swimmer doesn't have time. So think about things like making a big batch. Sometimes if you're going to be late home tomorrow night and not have that same time to be cooking a meal, make a big batch of spaghetti bolognese or lasagna or whatever it is, have it in the fridge, and then you can get home and reheat it. So it's a much quicker option some nights when you know you're not going to have time. Same with lunches. If you've got leftovers, that's a good easy way of feeding athletes the next day, obviously following safe food practices, but leftovers can be really handy. so that you know there's a good meal there for them, but you're not having to spend ages in the kitchen every day. Also around the practical side of things, making sure that if they're taking food with them to school or university, that you've got a little cooler pack so it's kept at the right temperatures, and things like that, so that we're not only fueling with the right foods but keeping it safe as well.
Can I ask you a question just about
Sure.
timing?
Yes.
And it's about timing after a session.
Yeah.
I've been told that it's really important that they eat within 20 to 30 minutes once they finish. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. So that's after this, but
okay.
yes, definitely
That's
is, yeah. So I'll go into that, but definitely in the, so we talk about the, actually I can go to that and then come
Oh,
back
I'm
to this.
sorry.
No,
I just didn't want to forget.
Yeah, so beforehand, we aim for 30 to 60 minutes before a session. And this means that, like I said, it can be hard when it's 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning and they're on the way to the pool and they, because you've got to maximise your sleep to help that recovery, so you're not getting up with ages of time before you go to the pool. But having something in that 30 to 60 minutes, even if it's something small to start with, to start that sort of training process into getting used to having food, this will make sure that their muscles are as fueled and ready to go as possible. And then, as you've said, the other really important point, especially with swimmers training 2, sometimes more times a day, is within 30 minutes. And this one, I think, again, it sounds quite easy, but with a swimmer, when you finished in the pool, you have a chat to your coach, then you fluff about in the change rooms for a while, have a long shower, all these sort of things, and then it might be a 20-minute drive home. So easily it can be an hour, 3/4 of an hour by the time you get home. And this is where this often gets neglected, and people say, oh, but I eat as soon as I get home, but they've missed that optimal period. I mean, you'll still get benefits from the food, of course, but that 30-minute period is when your muscles really, I guess, soak up as much as they can. And that's that period where, when you're training 2+ times a day for 1-2 more hours each time, that period will make sure that your muscles and your body and your mind are all refueled, recovered, and ready for the next session. So if you're missing that, then your muscles just aren't going to quite be as well prepared for the subsequent sessions. And if you're starting the week not recovering as well each session, by the end of the week, you're just going to be
I struggle when we have a night session that finishes at 8 and we've got to be up at 4 again the next morning.
Yeah.
So I really struggle because actually I'm not sure what's more important, is getting to bed or eating reasonably. So we try and eat after school instead and then have a snack.
Yep.
But is that okay?
Yeah. As long as you're having so if you're having kind of the main meal after school, going to training, have something straight after, and then maybe have supper just before they go to bed. Like, I know they'll be knackered by then, but depending on what they eat, if they're getting enough in straight after, then that's probably okay. But some people, if they find they're not going to bed for a little while after that, then even just a glass of milk before they go to bed, something just again to top you up and be ready for that really.
It's just really hard, so we try to get to bed at 8:30 because obviously that's really important because we're back up at 4. But just on that night it's really hard because we also live 20 minutes away, so it's 20 past 8 before we get home.
So that's where something like a smoothie could be a good idea, where you can pack lots into it, and they can drink it on the way home.
Which is what I try and do, and I usually have a flask, and I usually cook dinner and then bring it back and get it to eat in the car.
Perfect.
But okay, no, that's cool. I just wanted to know how important where it's kind of
for a swimmer, it is very hard, but it is really important.
Okay, all right.
What is the best way to tell a child that they actually need that food? Because sometimes after they race, you're passing them banana and they just give you like, I'm about to murder your mother. Like, I just raced, that's the last thing on my mind. And I always try to tell her like, imagine you're over a car, you used up all your fuel, you just need to refuel it. Taste doesn't come into it, and nutritionists will not tell you, what do you feel like eating? They'll tell you, what does your body need? But then it's sort of, with a teenager, telling it to a teenager, you kind of like, and they eat it like, are you happy now? So I'm just trying to avoid it bit of friction.
Yeah, no, and it is hard,
Is
and I
there
don't have
something
an easy
kind of
answer
we can
for
tell
you,
our
but I
children?
guess probably, if you say, eating and drinking like I'm trying to encourage you is going to make sure that, you'll get through your full week being able to train at your best. Otherwise, if each session you get to kind of halfway and you're running at 80% and then 3/4 of the way and you're down to about 50%, you're not getting as much out of every session, and come race day, you're not going to be able to perform as at your potential.
What quite often she'll say is that she'll feel like she'll throw it out. It's after the race, not so much training. Training is fine, but when they're pushing themselves and afterwards, and all that, I guess adrenaline is slowly leaving the body and all
and
that. So that's when they feel. Yes.
But that's where something like a sports drink might help, or
we don't do sports drinks. We don't do sugar.
No.
And we had Dr. Stacey Simska.
Okay.
And she recommended salt and something else, not these sports drinks.
Yeah,
so,
well, I mean everyone's different, obviously, but if you can't eat, you need to get something in.
Yeah.
So whether it be there's good evidence around. There's sugar in these as well, but you could just use a plain milk drink, because then it's got some protein, it's got the lactose, which is a natural sort of carbohydrate source, but it's an easy thing to drink without having to eat. And because sometimes it's hard to even chew when you're feeling a bit sick after a race and your nerves are kind of still high, your adrenaline's going. So I guess it's a bit of trial and error around what your athlete tolerates, what they like, and what.
Oh, she'll eat. It's just the initial response that it's the uphill battle. So I'm just wondering if there's something easier that we can.
Yeah, well, that's where or is it the actual fact that it's a banana that she doesn't want?
No, it's the eating straight after the race. After the race, and she does the long distance races. So let's say if you swam, like in Tapo, she swam 7.5 kilometers, but then she had something later. But obviously after 7.5 kilometers, the last thing on your mind is.
Yeah,
so she'll have a drink.
The primo chocolate milks are really good.
But they have so much sugar. We don't do sugar.
But you do need sugar to recover, like not in terms of like eating a whole lot of lollies,
maple syrup, there are other alternatives.
Oh, there definitely are. But that's where, finding something that you're happy to have that's a lower sugar option. But a swimmer needs carbohydrate.
In the chocolate milks, the primo ones, is quite a lot of the sugar is from the lactose, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, there is some added for the flavour, but there's some really good evidence.
We don't do any processed sugars.
Sorry,
we don't do any processed sugars in our household whatsoever, so I don't want to reintroduce
even just try plain milk. Because that'll have the natural sugar of the lactose, which is part of the milk. But it will.
As I said, it's not a problem getting it down to her. It's the the actual battle of the will, so to speak. She'll eat it, but it's the.
Maybe finding something that she comes up with that she'd be comfortable having, because sometimes if you're told you need to do this, you'll get that pushback. But if you kind of work with her on something that she likes,
she's got like 20 things to choose from. It's the initial that I'll feel sick if I eat.
What about high five sports drinks?
There's so many of them.
They have zero sugar.
But you need the carbohydrate to help the recovery.
They have, but they don't have processed sugars and stuff like that. That's something that our club dietitian recommended.
There's a few different brands that use kind of more natural sugars in there. There's so many. I don't always recommend certain brands because there's so many of them out there nowadays that it's hard to keep up with, and they change their. Amanda and I were talking about something else before, but they change their formulation regularly too, so we need to kind of keep on top of so many of them. But I guess work with her to find something that sits comfortably, and even if it's not, straight after her race, but if she can do it maybe 10 minutes after her race, just to allow her a bit of time to kind of calm down a bit and sort of rest a little bit. But within that half an hour period is kind of the ideal, but not everyone works to ideal or can't do ideal, but that's sort of what we try and get athletes to do as much as possible.
I had a problem with my son when he came here because he went from 6 sessions a week to 10 sessions a week, and he had a problem with less hydration and having meal having to have a meal after afternoon session after 30 minutes, 45 when we come home.
Yeah.
After that he had problem. He started for a year, he lost 3 kilograms from age 10 to 11, so when he should have gained at least 5, he lost 3 kilograms, and then he had a lot of other problems.
And
we ended up with seeing a specialist and everything with that to sort out what's going on.
Yeah.
Because it was his digestion, everything was wrong.
Yeah.
Just because of that.
And it is really hard, like to fuel a swimmer around all the sessions, their school, their university, all those other things. It's like another part of, I mean, some people say, I feel like I'm eating all the time, but you kind of need to be to keep fueled.
He also had a problem when we come home, he's probably over hungry and he can't eat.
Yeah, yeah.
Also, so it was like.
And like you say, some people kind of feel a bit nauseous after events or a big session. So it is really hard, and it can be a bit of trial and error in finding what is right for that person, and what they will be willing to eat, what sits well with them and doesn't make them feel more sick or more uncomfortable. So it can be a bit of trial and error, but it is, these are the things that kind of help recovery by, getting something in. Even if you're going for more natural things, even a small banana or something small, but it's not got added sugars or anything, but it's going to start that recovery. And I guess just, I think working with her to say, well, what would you eat, what could you try, and it takes a bit of practice too, so never try anything new on a race day, always practice it in training, because we need to know that you're going to feel comfortable, you're not going to feel sick, especially when nerves are high and can feel a bit nauseous before, after races and things like that, so always practice things in training or at a smaller meet where the nerves aren't going to be as high. Never try something new at a meet like nationals or something kind of much bigger. Okay. I missed something out before. Oh yeah, so snacks. Because swimmers have such high energy needs, snacks are a big part of their daily intake. So they do need to, because a lot of people sit down to a massive meal and they actually can't eat anymore. So that's where snacks come in handy, where it's little top-ups, in those windows before and after training, before bed, things like that, just to keep topping energy levels up, help that recovery and refueling. So all sorts of options. Fruit can be a nice easy one, milk-based drinks, like we said, just a basic chocolate milk has some really good evidence to say that it can be as good as or better than some of the quite expensive kind of supplements out there. Sandwiches, toast, nut mixes, muesli bars, doesn't have to be fancy, expensive options. So next one is something that Amanda has brought up, and quite a few, I have been highlighting this a lot lately, and I've had the odd person say I'm extra cautious, but I would rather be extra cautious than not. So a lot of these foods that have added protein to them, we don't know where the proteins come from, and I'll talk a bit more about supplements soon, but once your athletes are at a point where they could be drug tested, this becomes high risk, and I prefer to get people aware of this and practicing these things long before they might get drug tested, because it's just they know what they're doing, and they're not putting themselves at risk at all. So anything that has, there's just a couple of examples here, added protein or protein plastered on it, read the label, and I'll show you some examples in a minute, because they often have added protein, and there is a way, and I'll show you the website soon, that we can check supplements, but we don't know where this has come from, we don't know what contaminants might be in it, so I recommend people not to have these added protein snacks, because we just don't quite know what's in there. And when you're reading ingredients lists, they do change regularly, so ingredients will be swapped out, swapped in. If you've got time, make some of these things yourself, but I know, everyone is really busy. And things like muesli bars and protein balls, there's heaps of recipes online for them, and you can, if your athlete doesn't like particular things, you can, find a recipe that doesn't have those, but has other types of nuts or dried fruit and things like that they do like. So here's a couple of examples just to kind of highlight. As I said, there's so many of these out there nowadays. I don't tend to kind of recommend certain brands because they change often, and there's so many of them out there, and different people like different things. But to help guide you, so this is one brand. So it does have up there 5.6 grams of protein. It's a little ball which, it's not there is quite a bit of sugar in some of these, but they are a convenient, easy snack sometimes when you need a quick on the go. So looking at this list, dates, peanuts, coconut, apple juice, pear puree, cherry puree, elderberry juice, pink salt, that would be fine. But something like, and this is where you've got to be careful as well, because, so that's a different brand, but, so this one, so it's a tasty brand, smushed whole food balls. So again, looking through that list, it's all dates, nuts, juice, coconut, and natural flavours. So that one would be okay. But same brand, looks very similar. Only difference is this one is smushed protein balls, the other one is whole food balls. So just given there's protein on there, it says 10 grams of protein per serve. Look at the list because so there's powder that's the cacao powder, but it's here, the soy protein. We don't know where that's come from. So it might be safe and it might be completely fine, and yes, there's only a tiny bit in it, but we don't know where this soy protein's come from, what factory it's been made in, what else may have been made in that factory. There could be contaminants in it. So I would stay away from those sort of things. This is where it can be confusing. So again, read the labels, but a protein nut bar, so that would make me go, oh, I don't know about this. But looking through this list, so there's 71% of the 3 nut types, a couple of different types of sugar, puffed rice, humectant sorbitol, which is like keeps it kind of moist, and an emulsifier keeps it sort of mixed up. This one would be okay because there's no added protein powder. The protein is coming from the nuts. Muesli bars are kind of a tough one because there are so many out there. Some of them you might as well be eating a chocolate bar. So they're not, I wouldn't say they're the best option, but they're convenient. So if you need something in your swimmer's bag that if they run out of other food, they know they've always got a couple of bars in there. They're a good, easy, convenient source, but just make sure that you're looking at the labels and not, there's some basic guidelines here. Just trying to go for lower sugar options. We need carbohydrates, but we don't necessarily want that as sugar. Fibre, so some of them will have no fibre, other ones with a few more nuts and grains will have a bit more fibre, and lower saturated fat options. So I know it takes time to read labels, but it is quite important to do so. This one here, another one with protein. So looking through and it's got 10 grams of protein. So some people go, yes, this is a really easy way to get some protein in. But peanuts, glucose, soy nuggets. What's a soy nugget? The first ingredient is isolated soy protein, which again we don't know where it's come from, what's in it. So I would stay clear of that sort of thing as well. So leading on to, a lot of people ask me about supplements, and yes, there is a place for them, but always real food first. We get so much more from real food. Some things we probably don't even know what are in the real whole foods, and we get benefits from them. other things, they're just a good package of all sorts of goodness for us. So food first always. Supplements are really only to be used when we can't get everything we need from food, or if we need a convenient way. So that's where sometimes, as I've said, sports drinks can be an option where we need an easy way to refuel and rehydrate. And there are, some of the athletes, we will use different supplements where we've got everything else sorted. As I said, that foundation has to be right, or else the icing on the cake of the supplements is you're not going to get any benefit from it. There are risks of taking contaminants, and there's not any supplement we can say is 100% safe. The ones we do use and work with are batch tested. So every batch of the supplement is tested by an independent lab, and this website here, so the easiest way to find it is just by Googling informed sport, and on that website that can tell you if certain supplements are every batch is tested or not, to make sure there's no contaminants. And the supplements that we use with the high performance sport athletes, anything we use has to be tested and on this list, because otherwise it's too risky. We don't know what else might be in it. There's a few cases, I guess being swimming parents, you might have heard of Shayna Jack, the Australian swimmer, who's still battling her case, and it can happen so easily, and even a tiny amount in your body can cause a positive test, and that can mean the end of your career. And the example they give in Drug-Free Sport New Zealand is even 1 teaspoon of a contaminant in an Olympic-sized swimming pool can show that positive test. So we have to be super careful, and I don't like to use any supplements unless, like I said, we've got the food nailed, and there are some supplements that are evidence-based. We know from research that they do help, only if you've got everything else sort of sorted. So definitely always food first, and like I said earlier, planning ahead. I can't emphasise that enough, especially with swimming where you do get time poor because there's so many sessions, everything else you're juggling in life. So plan ahead and get your athlete to help start taking ownership and supporting you with this. I know it's easy for swimmers with amazing parents to sort of rely on them to do everything because you're too busy and you're focused on your swimming and your training in school or university. But as they get a bit older, it is good to start working with them to help make sure that you've got everything they need for the week when you're doing the shopping, to make sure that each day they're taking the supplies they need for that day. If they're leaving home at 4 o'clock in the morning and not getting home till 8:30 at night, you've got to make sure they've got all their supplies for that day. They're kept cool for the foods that need to be kept cool, and not relying on convenience shops that might not have kind of what you need or what are good options. And developing those habits now, obviously for their performance and health as a teenager, as an early 20s, as a young person, as an athlete, but also things that they can carry on for their life really, and making sure that they're developing habits at a young age that they'll carry on. And that's where some of your athletes may not be at the point where they're getting drug tested yet, but I always emphasise the being super careful around supplements and not taking them unless you need them, because there is a risk with them, and it can happen so easily. And just making sure too, think that also not using, it's easy to sometimes a friend's got a fancy new shake, I'm going to try some, but don't. Make sure your athletes are not trying friends, other people at the gym, things like that, because again you just don't know what that supplement might have in it. Also when if you're going to a cafe and there's options like a smoothie and you can add some protein in, don't add the protein in, because we don't know what protein powder is. Same with things like those little bliss balls or fruit balls or whatever you want to call them. Again, a lot of cafes do have them nowadays, so just make sure that there's no added protein powder in them, because again, we don't know. I mean, if you're making them at home and you know where the protein has come from, that it's checked on this website that it's on there, then it's safer, much safer. But if you don't know where these things have come from, then it's not worth the risk. And just making sure things like so sports drinks, I know I was asked about some different brands of sports drinks before, checking them that they're on these lists. Gels, they're a good handy way to get some carbohydrates in quickly, so making sure that the gels you're using are checked on this website. I can't sort of push that one enough either, because it just can so easily go so wrong, and then it can be the end of someone's career. And yeah, there are a few examples in the media at the moment with swimmers, Shane and Jack, like I said. Another one is a sort of well, not that historic, but is another Australian swimmer who had a test, I think it might have been like the 2004 or 2008 Olympics. It was a good 10, 12, yeah, it was a good few Olympics ago anyway. They must have redone his sample or something, and it showed up that there's something in it. So it might mean that the whole Australian relay team will lose their Olympic medal if it gets further investigated and he's found guilty. So there's, it's scary, and I don't mean to scare you, but I guess just being super cautious is my message, and not taking supplements unless they are really needed to use whole food. It's much safer, you get much more out of it, and in most circumstances you can get everything you need just from food.
Oh.
Yep.
Would you also say that it might be wise for some of the parents, because I found out that my daughter, when she was unwell, that I had to tell the GP
Yep.
to check
Definitely.
the medication, so make sure that you tell your GP that your child is involved in a sport.
Yep.
Because then they can actually swap if they ever get sick and prescribe, because that
Yep.
was the other thing that we found.
Definitely. So
Not nutrition, sorry.
No, but that's a very good point. So anytime your swimmers are going to the doctor and they need some medication, just get them to check these websites that they can check it, because some medications are completely fine. They don't need a certification to say that they're taking it, but other medications are banned unless you have a doctor's certificate to say they need this medication for this purpose, and then it's fine, but they need that certification to say that I have prescribed this medication for this reason, and then it's okay. But yeah, very good point. Yeah. And there's some really good education tools on the Drug Free Sport New Zealand website that talk you through some of this stuff, show you the websites to look at for these things, run you through a sort of real life simulation of a drug test, which is, I think, quite good for athletes to do, because the first time you get drug tested it is quite daunting and hard. So to have run through that example online so they kind of know what to expect is quite good, and we get the carded athletes to do that, but it doesn't hurt for everyone to do it really. It's a good education tool. So a bit of a summary, and then we can have a chat and discuss and that sort of thing. So nutrition and hydration fuel optimal performance, but also your health. So it's not just about performing at your best. We need to consider the whole health of an athlete, not just the physical health, but the mental health of athletes, as well as their performance, and a variety of food groups and timing the food right all make up that bigger picture. Recovery, preparing and planning ahead, and real food always over supplements, for the reasons we've talked about. So any questions, discussion points?
I just want to say thank you. I've been battling for a few years trying to get information, and thank you very much eventually. Because it's really different in sports, especially swimming.
Yeah.
So you as a mum will think, oh no, you got to have this, it's good, and then you actually in the pool battling, or you know what I'm saying, it either lifts you or drops you.
Yeah.
So thank you.
That's all right. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming along.
Can I just ask, while we were talking about medications, what about medications that naturopaths and homeopaths give?
Yeah, you do have to be careful around that.
Because I'm trying to avoid
yeah,
medications.
yeah. Again, I would check the websites to make sure that there's nothing in, because some of them can be banned. Some of them might have, and I guess the thing is we don't know if we don't know where they're made. They can be, some things are made in factories, labs with products that are on the banned list, so there might not be a banned ingredient in it, but we don't know what else is made in the same areas to know what contaminants, so you do have to be very careful, and that's why, again, any supplements and things that you can avoid, I would, just because of that risk.
I'm asking because my son has problems with allergies.
Yeah.
Usually when I go to GP, they are always giving just corticosteroids.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I don't want that.
Yeah.
While our homeopath naturopath, he is having
Yeah.
everything natural, so that's why
Yeah, I would check some of the websites around.
The GP can do it though, because
Sorry?
the GP can do it.
Yeah.
So when you tell your GP, the GP will look up an alternative.
Yeah.
but they every time they are just like, this is the thing that
No, but you tell them that your child can be drug tested and they will find you an alternative. Trust me, because I've been there and
Yeah.
they always now check, and it's now on my child's file. So
Yeah.
even if somebody else sees her, they cross check.
Yeah.
So anything
And
that
it's-
is different.
And it's their
something that you have
responsibility
to
do
you
that
have to
too.
communicate to your GP.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, definitely. So, yes, it's
Because there are antihistamines without steroids and all that. And
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
a younger child that it's also she had anaphylactic shock, but they know that when our surname comes up that is this the swimmer, and I just say no, this one. But
Yeah.
it's something that you need to really push with your GP.
yeah,
each
and
time.
do like you
Yeah.
say, have it on their note, like an
Yeah.
allergy would be, because then it will pop up every time. And just, I guess, every time you go, do remind them, is it okay?
And check yourself too,
Yeah.
because they don't always get it right.
I know I have allergy to penicillin, so
Yeah.
I was almost given penicillin, I don't know,
I
a
just
number
think
of
it always
times.
pays to check yourself.
It does.
Because they know a little bit about a lot, so.
Yeah. And
it's
that's
always
where
dangerous.
it can be, I mean, I know often people have been with the same family GP for a long time, but it can also be helpful to see a GP that specialises in sport, because then they're much more aware of some of these things. Because like you say, a GP knows a lot, or a little bit about a lot of things, but if you go to kind of more specialist people, they do have more knowledge around they'll know what medication is okay for certain illnesses or things like that, without having to sort of check and then double check, and then it takes that responsibility off you guys as parents. Sometimes if you know that they're a sports specialist, they'll know these things. Yeah.
But just a question about when you're at a big meet then, and the foods in between and the timing. You know, some people take a glucose, barley sugar, or if you haven't got a lot of time between races.
Yeah.
Some thoughts on that?
Yep. I mean, not a massive advocate for eating, bags of lollies,
Yeah.
obviously, but for a quick, when you've got a couple of races quite close together and you need a quick top up, something like a couple of jet planes or snakes. Some of the little gels are really good, but again, just make sure they are tested. So it is about finding a practical, quick thing, and especially if your swimmers feel a bit nauseous and nervous, it's around finding something that they can tolerate. So no point saying you've got to eat a big sandwich when you've got 5 minutes. You've got to warm down, get dry again and go off. So a quick, couple of lollies is fine. Something that's going to be digested easily too. So that's where a sports drink can be nice and easy, because you can quickly just get some down. It's rehydrating, getting some fuel in, and they're off to the next race. So, and around timing, I always try and get athletes to eat very similar on race day to what they would on a normal day, because then you know you tolerate it, you feel good with it, you've tried it so many days before, but obviously timing will change a bit around, because you're not going to be up as early as a normal training session, but just sort of move things around a little bit to make sure that they're eating in that 30 to 60 minutes before going to the pool, then maybe having a quick snack or something after the warm-up before their race. Again, it depends a bit on how much time they've got as to what they might eat. And then, again, you might have a couple of races, so quick little top-ups in between, and keeping hydrated. I think at a meet, a lot of people forget, because they're a bit out of routine, they're focused on the big stuff, but forget to drink and have some of those extra little bits and pieces that they need to get through the whole week of racing, particularly if you've got multiple events, a few relays and things, and you need to be at your best on Saturday night, not just on Tuesday morning. Monday afternoon was the first session this week, wasn't it? So making sure that you're not getting to the end of the week and you're knackered when your number one event is on Saturday. And again, just being prepared. So if your child is travelling to another area, take things with them that they really like, or make sure there's a supermarket nearby where you can go. Once we're travelling internationally, again, it sort of depends on the country they're going. If they're going to Australia, you can get pretty similar things there, but if there are things that your athlete really likes and relies on, certain bars or different things, supplements, if they're taking any powders or like protein powders or gels or sports drinks, take those things with them, because you've checked that they're safe, that they're not going to be reliant on going to a store in another country where you can't read the label and you don't know what's in it. So just again, preparing and thinking ahead, and taking supplies with them where they can. And I mean, we can't travel internationally at the moment, but sometimes at the moment to practice these things, if you're flying down south, practice some of the things like taking a drink bottle with you on the plane to keep you hydrated, because that's one of the ways where people get so dehydrated on the plane when they're going somewhere. So practice some of these things now when they're kind of shorter flights and not having to wait around for as long at airports and things like that perhaps they will in time. But practicing all these things now that will become more important as the world opens up again and we go back to somewhat normal, hopefully.
The new normal.
The new normal. Yeah.
It's not based on nutrition, but you might be able to
right.
answer the question. Is if you have to do a TUE form for drug testing for another sport, will it automatically cross over to swimming, or do you have to do two separate ones?
I think you'd have to do two separate ones because each sport is slightly different, and you'll probably know more about that, Amanda.
Yeah, you need to do it for swimming as well.
Yeah, and you'll have to probably do two forms also about where you are at what time and telling them exactly where to expect you to be for out of competition testing and things like that.
It's a hell of a process, eh?
But keeps.
The worst part is if you have a swimmer or an athlete of any description under the age of 18, they're covered normally by a paediatrician. But in the grown-up world of drug support and drug taking, they want it by a psychologist or a psychiatrist or one of those professionals, and your child doesn't get passed over to them until they're 18. So it's a real catch-22, and we're getting conflicting stories from coaches in Drug Sport New Zealand. Drug Sport New Zealand are saying, no, you don't need the TUE, you don't need all the documentation yet. If you're drug tested and it shows up, which it will, then we'll deal with it. Then it's called a retrospective TUE. And then the coaches are going, no, once you've done, you'll be back. It's like, oh, what do we do? It's a horrible place to be in. I mean, she's just done nationals for athletics, and now she's here, and it's like at any point she could be done, and I just don't know. I can't do anything. I'm really like sitting on the fence, going, oh my god, what's going to happen? But
I can connect you with drug-free sport.
I've been talking to Victoria. Yeah. So she's actually put it in writing because I was feeling so connected.
Yeah, because they've just changed the whole process.
Yes.
In the past, you used to have to apply no matter what. But up to a certain level within swimming and with all sports, they do the retrospective. So if you do a test and something comes up, then you get retrospective TUE. If you're in the performance program where they where they have a kind of lens over you, you would be required to get TUE. But look, if you've been speaking to Drug Free Sport and they've got it in writing for you, then
I've done the TUE, but of course the documentation is filled out all by a paediatrician, and they're saying no, it's got to be done by a.
And probably get some of these things in writing from
Yeah.
Drug Free Sport New Zealand.
That's
as well.
what I did. I said to Victoria, I said, look, I'm not calling you like,
Yeah,
I'm
no.
not clowning you or
it makes you
something.
nervous though, doesn't
But
it? Yeah.
please, I've got the coaches breathing down my neck saying, she's internationally classified and she's going to get sprung.
Yeah.
And you guys are saying something else. And I said, I'm really caught in the middle. So she did give me a letter saying,
Yeah,
I
that's good.
stand by it, and
always
if I
helps
have
if you've got
made
it
the
in
error, and I'm
writing.
thinking, in hindsight, that's fine. And I
Yeah.
can just imagine that's going to go pear-shaped at some point.
Yeah.
But it is really, really hard
Yeah.
when your athletes get to a level where they're not quite deemed to be an adult, which is 18, and most of their prescriptions and stuff, especially if they're on a banned substance, then it is done by a paediatrician
Yeah.
and not really anybody else until they're 18.
Yeah,
So-
that is hard. Yeah. But if you've got it in writing from Drug Free Sport.
So will that also carry out, like she's done it for athletics, but the fact I've got the letter to say that she would do a retrospective, would that cover swimming as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not easy juggling all these things, is it?
It's a nightmare, especially when they're a para swimmer. It's even worse.
Yeah. No, I hats off to parents of swimmers. You guys are amazing, and I think, athletes will get so far, but then with the support of you guys, they'll really get to that next level so much easier. But I know it's not an easy thing, but super exciting when they, achieve their goals and do really well. So yeah, you guys do amazing.